The story begins with a promise neither of them wanted to make. Rosetta only agreed to the date because her mother insisted. Another arranged evening meant to impress the wealthy elite. And Stanley? He had sworn off romance altogether, turning every blind date into a cold business transaction. For him, love was an illusion, a distraction from the empire he'd built with his bare hands. But fate doesn't ask for permission. The night they met, Rosetta walked into the glittering rooftop restaurant expecting boredom, maybe humiliation, certainly nothing resembling happiness. Stanley was already there, leaning back in his chair, every inch the billionaire tycoon women whispered about in salons and dinner parties. His reputation preceded him. Ruthless in business, untouchable in life, she thought she'd sit through polite conversation and slip away unnoticed. Instead, she challenged him. Where others flattered, Rosetta questioned. Where others stared at his fortune, she looked him in the eyes. Stanley wasn't used to that, and in her laughter, her quiet defiance, he felt something he hadn't in years. Alive. Neither admitted it, of course. She told herself he was arrogant and dangerous. He told himself she was just another society pawn. But as the evening unfolded, with secrets slipping between glasses of wine and the city lights shimmering below, both realized something terrifying. This wasn't just another arranged date. This was the beginning of the one love story that could break them, or save them. The zipper of the dress hissed like a warning as my mother's hands tugged it up my back. I kept my eyes fixed on the mirror, refusing to flinch at the reflection staring back. The woman in the glass looked polished, perfect. Curls pinned, lips painted, diamonds winking like bait in the low light. But beneath the silk, my skin itched with the weight of it all. "Chin higher, Rosetta," Morel ordered. Her voice clipped, as if the angle of my head could rewrite my fate. She smoothed the fabric over my hips with sharp, practiced hands. "You need to remember who you are tonight. This is about securing our family's future. Do not forget that. My family's future. Never mine." I swallowed hard, my tongue thick with the words I longed to say. What about my life? What about my dreams? But I had learned long ago that such protests only invited scorn. Morel's love came gilded in conditions, her approval a prize dangled just out of reach. Instead, I let my lashes drop, let her see only obedience. "Yes, Mother." When she left the room to take a call, I exhaled, shaky and uneven. My fingers brushed the window ledge, the glass cool against my skin. Beyond it, the city glittered with possibilities I'd never been allowed to claim. Somewhere out there were women who lived by choice, not by arrangement. I wondered what freedom tasted like, but freedom wasn't on the menu tonight. Tonight, it was another arranged dinner, another man with wealth stamped across his name. This one was different, though. Stanley. Even I had heard of him. A billionaire whose reputation was as sharp as glass, a man whispered about in every salon, every gathering of women like my mother who believed marriage was a ladder to climb. I told myself I'd go through the motions, offer polite smiles, then slip away into forgettable shadows. It was just one night, one more performance. Across the city, in a penthouse perched like a crown above the skyline, Stanley poured himself a measure of whiskey. The amber liquid caught the glow of the floor-to-ceiling windows, light bending like fire in the glass. He swirled it once, watching the liquid spin, before pressing it to his lips. The city stretched beneath him, a sprawl of lights and movement, a kingdom he had built from nothing. To anyone else, it would have looked like triumph. To him, it was noise, empty, hollow noise. Another dinner. Another woman who thought she wanted him. He knew the pattern. Soft words, admiring glances, calculated laughter. They all came looking for the same thing: security, status, the shine of his empire. No one looked at the man behind the empire anymore. Not since he'd been burned by love that turned to betrayal. He had sworn off romance, sworn off illusions. If he agreed to evenings like this one, it was obligation, nothing more. The board wanted stability. Appearances mattered. and if keeping them content meant sacrificing a few hours of his night, so be it. He tugged at his cufflinks, their weight an old habit, and reminded himself that love was for dreamers. He was not a dreamer. The restaurant was a temple to wealth, glass walls opening to the city below, chandeliers dripping like frozen constellations. Soft music threaded through the air, the kind that faded into the clink of glasses and the murmur of deals disguised as conversations. I walked in with my spine stiff, Morel's hand still pressed into the small of my back like a ghost. My heels clicked against marble, each step rehearsed, controlled. The hostess smiled, leading me through a maze of silver and crystal until she stopped at the far corner. And there he was, Stanley. He was already seated, his posture relaxed yet commanding, his gaze scanning the room until it landed on me. I felt it. Sharp, steady, unflinching. My chest tightened as though that gaze pinned me in place. The world whispered about him being ruthless, untouchable. Looking at him now, I understood why. "Rosetta," he said as I approached, his voice deep, even. It wasn't a greeting so much as a statement, a marking of territory. "Stanley," I replied, lowering myself into the chair across from him. I folded my hands in my lap to keep them from betraying me. The waiter filled our glasses with wine that shimmered like rubies, then retreated, leaving silence stretching between us. Most women, I imagined, would rush to fill it with admiration, with flattery designed to please. But silence had always been my rebellion, my shield. Finally, I tilted my head, my voice steady, despite the tremor in my stomach. "Do you always begin your evenings looking like you'd rather be anywhere else?" His brow arched slightly, surprise flickering in his eyes. For a man who had likely been fed nothing but honeyed words, my bluntness was a stone dropped into still water. "Do you always begin conversations by criticizing your date?" he countered, tone dry yet not unkind. "Only when it's true," I said, lifting my glass and taking a measured sip. Something shifted in his expression then. Not quite a smile, but a ghost of one. "You're different." Different. The word clung to me, unwanted and yet dangerously alluring. Dinner unfolded not as I expected, but as a duel. Questions, sharp and deliberate. Answers, equally sharp. He asked why I had come. I told him honestly, because my mother had demanded it. He asked what I wanted most. I admitted freedom, though I dressed it in laughter as though it were just a whim. And when I asked him why a man like him wasted time on arranged evenings, his reply was stripped bare. "Obligation," he said, swirling the wine in his glass. "They think a woman at my side makes me more palatable, less of a threat." "Does it?" I asked softly. His gaze locked with mine. "No." A shiver traced down my spine, though I masked it with a steady breath. Beneath the polished veneer, I saw something raw, something real. The night stretched, candlelight softening the edges of the world, city lights shimmering below. Against my will, I found myself leaning forward, drawn into a rhythm I couldn't escape. There was laughter, unexpected, unguarded, and moments where silence hummed not with tension, but with something dangerously close to comfort. I had expected boredom, maybe humiliation. Instead, I found a man who looked me in the eye, who listened not to impress, but to understand. And that terrified me more than any of my mother's demands ever had. When dessert came and went, we stood at the edge of the rooftop, the city wind tugging at my hair. He leaned against the glass railing, watching me as though I were a puzzle he wasn't sure he wanted to solve. "This was," he began, then hesitated, as if admitting too much would fracture the armor he wore. "Unexpected?" I finished for him. His lips curved, that almost smile tugging at the corners. "Yes. Unexpected." I should have turned, should have walked away before the ground beneath me shifted any further. But I lingered, caught in the weight of his stare, the pull of something unnamed yet undeniable. And in that moment, one truth pressed against my ribs. This wasn't just another arranged date. This was the beginning of something that might break me or save me. Have you ever gone into a situation expecting nothing, only to be surprised? Share your story in the comments. The following morning, Rosetta lingered in her room longer than usual, staring at the fading outline of the midnight blue dress draped across her chair. The dinner should have been another forgettable evening, another ritual of compliance. But she couldn't shake the way Stanley's gaze had pinned her or the unexpected edge of honesty in his voice. Her mother's knock came like a command, sharp against the door. "Rosetta, may I come in?" Morel's tone never sought permission. It demanded it. She entered before Rosetta could reply, sweeping in with her perfume and precision. Morel's world had always been one of appearances, where every detail was curated, every move rehearsed. Her hair was perfectly set, pearls gleaming at her throat, as if even breakfast required performance. "Well?" Morel asked, folding her arms. "Did he impress you?" Rosetta forced a neutral smile. "He was different." "Different is good," Morel said briskly. "Stanley is not just wealthy, Rosetta. He is influential. Men like him build dynasties, and you could finally stop drifting in shadows." Rosetta's lips parted to answer, but the familiar weight pressed against her chest. Shadows were safer than cages. Still, she nodded, knowing resistance would only sharpen her mother's tongue. Morel had lived her entire life weaving nets to climb higher in society. Her daughter was her last and greatest chance. Left alone again, Rosetta drifted to the window. Beyond the glass, the city sprawled, alive and indifferent. Somewhere in that chaos were people who chose their own paths. She longed for that, an independence she'd never tasted. In secret, she scribbled designs in notebooks, sketches of jewelry she dreamt of crafting, not wearing. Her hands yearned to create, not only to adorn. But dreams like that were dismissed in her world, tucked away before Morel could see and sneer. Rosetta feared she was losing herself piece by piece, until nothing would remain but the daughter Morel had crafted for display. Across the city, Stanley's morning began with the quiet hum of his office, steel, glass, and order. Terrell, his COO and oldest friend, stood across the desk, flipping through a tablet with the efficiency of a man who had no patience for wasted time. "You survived dinner," Terrell said dryly, not looking up. Stanley leaned back in his chair, running a hand across his jaw. "Barely." "That bad?" Stanley hesitated. "No, different." Terrell's head lifted, eyes narrowing. He had known Stanley since the early days, when ambition was carved from desperation and failure was a luxury they couldn't afford. He'd seen the man bleed for his empire, seen him shattered when betrayal gutted his trust. Since then, Stanley had treated women as negotiations, never as partners. "Different how?" Terrell asked, suspicion in his voice. Stanley didn't answer immediately. Instead, he poured himself coffee, gaze lingering on the skyline. "She doesn't play the game. No flattery, no rehearsed lines. She challenged me." Terrell closed the tablet with a snap. "That sounds dangerous." "Why?" Stanley asked, though he already knew. "Because you like it," Terrell replied simply. "And liking someone clouds judgment. We can't afford distraction, not when investors are circling like vultures." Stanley's jaw tightened. He built his empire on control, on shutting out weakness. Love had already betrayed him once, when the woman he trusted chose his rival, taking secrets and nearly destroying his company in the process. He had sworn never again. Never again would he bleed for something as fleeting as affection. But Rosetta's eyes haunted him, not with softness, but with defiance. It unsettled him. Meanwhile, Rosetta's day unfolded beneath Morel's watchful gaze. Every phone call her mother took, every visitor who arrived, carried the same theme: alliances, marriages, reputations. Rosetta felt herself shrinking with each word, yet inside her chest burned a quiet rebellion. At lunch, Morel pressed further. Stanley is not a man you can toy with, Rosetta. If you want his attention, you must be strategic. No arguments, no silly ideals. Be agreeable, polished, charming. He will respect that. Rosetta bit her tongue. She had already seen Stanley's reaction to charm. Indifference. What had drawn his eyes last night wasn't compliance, but her refusal to bow. She knew it instinctively, though admitting it aloud would only invite Morel's scorn. Later that evening, Rosetta found herself at her desk, flipping through the sketches hidden beneath fashion magazines. She traced the lines of a design she had drawn months ago, a pendant shaped like a falling star, a dream of independence, a life where her worth wasn't measured by whose arm she held. Yet she tucked it away quickly when Morel entered, because dreams were dangerous under her mother's roof. At the same hour, Stanley stood before the window of his penthouse, a glass of scotch in hand. The night skyline was his kingdom, every light a conquest. Yet power meant little in the quiet hours. His mind wandered unbidden to Rosetta's laughter, sharp and unpolished, nothing like the refined echoes he was used to. He told himself it was nothing, a flicker. He had no room for weakness. And yet, weakness was exactly what gnawed at him. The memory of vulnerability. Years ago, he had allowed love to blind him, only to be betrayed. The scar remained, invisible but raw. To let someone close again would be to invite ruin. That was the truth he carried, heavy and absolute. But Rosetta had unsettled it. When they met again a week later, another dinner, another orchestrated arrangement, the air was different. The waiter set their table, candles flickering between them. Rosetta braced herself for another evening of silence stretched thin, but instead Stanley leaned forward. "You're not like the others," he said bluntly. Rosetta's brows arched. That's supposed to be a compliment? An observation. She smiled faintly, surprising herself. "Maybe you should try making more compliments. You might shock people." His lips quirked in that almost smile she'd glimpsed before. "You prefer honesty, don't you?" "Always," she said, her voice firm. For a moment, the restaurant around them vanished, leaving only the current between their words. Their sparring was sharper now, their curiosity bolder. Where Morel would have advised compliance, Rosetta offered challenge. Where Terrell warned of danger, Stanley leaned closer. Neither admitted it, but something unspoken sparked between them, fragile yet alive. Rosetta feared she might lose herself in a world she never chose. Stanley feared he might surrender to a vulnerability he had vowed never to touch again. And yet, across a candlelit table, they found themselves reaching for the very thing they both swore to resist. The seeds of something dangerous and irresistible had been planted. The second dinner had felt less like a performance and more like a battle of wits, and against her better judgment, Rosetta had enjoyed it. She left the table that night with her pulse still quickened, her laughter echoing in her own ears as if it belonged to someone freer, bolder. Yet enjoyment was dangerous. Enjoyment blurred the lines her mother had drawn around her life. The restaurant was buzzing, the hum of conversation and the chime of glasses building into a glittering chorus. Cameras flashed near the entrance as they often did in such places, but Rosetta paid them little mind. She wasn't the one the paparazzi came for. Stanley was. His empire attracted attention the way fire drew moths. But tonight, the light shifted to her. It began with a single flash, then another, until the corner of the room erupted in a flurry of movement. Paparazzi spilled through the doors, cameras raised like weapons, lenses hungry. Their table by the glass wall became the perfect stage. Stanley leaning slightly toward her, Rosetta's eyes alight with defiance as she teased him about his lack of compliments. Click, click, click. The moment was captured, multiplied, exaggerated. By the time security intervened, the damage was done. Rosetta shielded her face as cameras snapped, the reporters shouting over one another. "Stanley, is this your fiancé? Rosetta, when's the wedding? How long have you two been engaged?" Her heart plummeted. fiancé, engaged. The words crashed over her like cold waves, dragging her beneath. She opened her mouth to protest, but Stanley's hand touched the stem of his glass, his expression unmoved, almost calculating. When the chaos finally ebbed and the restaurant returned to uneasy normalcy, Rosetta pushed back her chair. "I need to leave." "Rosetta, no." She cut him off, her voice sharp, rising with the panic thrumming inside her chest. "I didn't sign up for this. I'm not part of your empire, or your board, or your image. I won't be made into something I'm not." Heads turned at nearby tables, whispers trickling through the air. She didn't care. She grabbed her clutch, the chair scraping against marble as she stood. Her legs carried her toward the exit with a speed born of desperation. Stanley rose immediately, ignoring the stairs, ignoring Terrell's warning voice in his head that echoed even from afar. "Careful. Distraction is dangerous." He followed her out into the night. The air outside was cool, scented with rain on pavement. Rosetta's heels struck the sidewalk in rapid, uneven rhythm as she tried to escape the suffocation of that room. She didn't stop until a hand caught her arm. "Rosetta." His voice was low, firm, the kind of voice that carried authority without needing to shout. She spun to face him, anger and something deeper burning in her eyes. Don't you dare think you can control this. I won't be paraded around for your image. I won't be the perfect pawn my mother dreams of. I can't." For the first time, Stanley saw her not as a dutiful daughter or an arranged companion, but as a woman cornered, fighting to protect the scraps of her freedom. Her chest rose and fell rapidly, her eyes shimmering with tears she refused to shed. "I'm not asking you to be a pawn," he said evenly. "You didn't have to," she shot back. "It's already been decided for me. Did you see their faces in there? To them, it's already true. I'm your fiancé now. My choices are gone." He studied her, the storm in her voice echoing something familiar in his chest. He had lost choices once, too, when betrayal forced him to build walls so high no one could scale them. He recognized the desperation of someone suffocating under expectation. "They'll believe what they want," Stanley said, softer now. "We can deny it, if you wish. But you know what that will cost." She froze. Cost. The word carried weight, a shadow stretching between them. To deny the rumors would mean humiliation for her mother, whispers of scandal that could strip Morel of the social standing she valued more than air. For Stanley, it would mean a blow to his image, his board whispering about instability, about weakness. Rosetta's throat tightened. "So I have to choose between being devoured by my mother's ambitions or your empire's expectations." His gaze didn't waver. "Or," he said quietly, "we play along." The suggestion stunned her. Play along, pretend. She stared at him, the edges of his face sharp under the streetlight. "You're serious?" "Yes. If the world insists on believing the story, then we control the narrative. No scandal, no weakness. It gives you protection from the whispers and me from the board." She shook her head, her laugh hollow. "You want me to be your shield, your convenient solution." He didn't deny it. "And you want freedom from your mother. This gives you leverage, more than you've ever had." The truth of it sliced through her anger. Leverage. The word was poison and promise both. With this false engagement, she could finally push back against Morel, finally claim space in a world that always sought to shrink her. Yet it also chained her tighter to Stanley, a man whose presence stirred something she wasn't ready to name. Her eyes locked with his, and in that charged silence, the first undeniable spark flared. Not the polite spark of obligation, not the shallow spark of attraction, but something deeper, wilder, laced with danger. She tried to look away, but his hand was still on her arm, steady and grounding. He wasn't pulling, wasn't restraining, just there. And she realized that for all his ruthlessness, he wasn't forcing her. The choice, however suffocating, was still hers. Rosetta's voice trembled as she whispered, "This is madness." His lips curved slightly, that ghost of a smile she'd seen before. Perhaps, but sometimes madness is survival. For a long moment, they stood on the edge of something neither wanted, but neither could deny. The city lights blurred around them, the din of traffic fading until there was only the thunder of her heart and the unwavering steel of his gaze. And though she told herself she hated him for it, part of her knew she was already tangled in the web. The scandal had birthed a story neither could control. Now they had to decide whether to fight it or use it. That night, the first lines of their fate were written in the glow of flashbulbs and the grip of a hand that refused to let her walk away. The headlines were merciless. Billionaire Stanley Caldwell secretly engaged? Mysterious heiress captures untouchable tycoon. Photos from the restaurant painted the scene with cruel precision. Her leaning forward, him staring intently, the flicker of a smile that could be interpreted as intimacy. To the world, the story was already written. Rosetta stared at the magazine spread laid across her mother's vanity table, her stomach twisting with dread. Morel's reflection hovered in the mirror behind her, lips curved in satisfaction. "This is perfect," Morel said, fingers tapping the glossy page. "Exactly the kind of attention we needed. Now you must hold your ground. Don't embarrass us, Rosetta. You must secure him." Rosetta's chest constricted. "Mother, it isn't real. I'm not—" "It doesn't matter what's real," Morel cut in, her tone razor sharp. "What matters is perception. Appearances build futures. You'll thank me when you're standing at the altar with the most powerful man in the city." Her throat ached with unshed words. Morel wasn't asking. She was demanding obedience, as she always had. And Rosetta felt the cage of expectation closing tighter. Meanwhile, Stanley handled the media storm with cold precision. In the glass walls of his office, Terrell laid a stack of clippings across the desk. "They've already branded her your fiancée. If you don't correct it, this becomes the truth." Stanley skimmed the headlines, his jaw tightening but his eyes unreadable. "Then let it." Terrell frowned. "You're playing with fire. The board will think this was planned. And if she's not what they expect—" "They'll adapt," Stanley interrupted. His voice carried the weight of finality, the kind that silenced rooms and bent contracts. Terrell hesitated. "She's not like the others, Stanley. That may be her greatest strength, or your greatest weakness." Stanley didn't answer. He thought of Rosetta's eyes the night she stormed out, blazing with defiance, her voice trembling as she declared she wouldn't be anyone's pawn. That fire was dangerous, but he found himself drawn to it, as if her rebellion mirrored the part of him that had long grown cold. Their forced appearances began almost immediately. A gala, a charity dinner, a gallery opening. Everywhere they went, flashes followed, speculation thick in the air. Rosetta played her part with poise, though inside she burned with resentment. Each event was another reminder that her freedom had been bartered away. At one gala, she stood by Stanley's side, champagne glass trembling faintly in her hand. Morel's voice rang in her ear from earlier. "Don't embarrass us. Keep smiling." When whispers rose in the crowd, suggestions that she was unworthy of Stanley, that she was a mere social pawn, her smile froze. She felt the walls closing in, the laughter sharper than crystal breaking. But then Stanley leaned down, his voice a low current only she could hear. "Let them talk," he murmured. "They're vultures. You don't feed them." His words, unexpectedly protective, steadied her. And when he straightened again, his hand brushed against hers, fleeting but deliberate. The tabloids, however, found new fodder in an old flame. Vivian. She reappeared like a storm breaking clear skies, poised, elegant, venom wrapped in silk. Vivian had once been photographed on Stanley's arm years ago, before betrayal had hardened him. Now she returned with whispers and insinuations, Interviews in glossy magazines where her coy smiles hinted at a history deeper than friendship. Statements designed to sting. Stanley deserves a woman who understands his world. Some girls just don't fit. Rosetta saw the headlines and felt the sting pierce her chest. Vivian's face was everywhere, her beauty flawless, her confidence unshaken. Compared to her, Rosetta felt like a child playing dress-up in gowns chosen by her mother. At another event, Vivian appeared in person. She glided across the ballroom in crimson silk, her laughter carrying easily. She paused just long enough to brush a kiss against Stanley's cheek, her eyes flicking to Rosetta with a smile sharpened into mockery. "Rosetta," Vivian purred, extending a hand. "How unexpected. I suppose congratulations are in order. You've managed to capture the man no one else could." Rosetta's fingers tightened around her glass. Her tongue burned with the urge to snap back, but Morel's warning clamped down on her courage. Instead, she smiled tightly, her silence betraying the storm inside her. Stanley watched the exchange closely. Later that night, as they stepped out into the cool air, he broke the silence. "You don't have to let her get to you," he said. Rosetta's head snapped up. "You think she doesn't? The whole world believes her whispers. That I'm unworthy, that I don't belong here." He regarded her quietly, then said, "Belonging is not granted by tabloids. It's earned. And you've already proven you're stronger than they'll ever admit." Her breath caught, the words striking deeper than she expected. For the first time, she saw not just a ruthless billionaire, but a man who recognized her struggle, who saw the fight she carried inside. Still, tension only grew. At home, Morel pressed harder. "Vivian is dangerous. Don't let her overshadow you. Remember what's at stake." And within Stanley's empire, board members whispered, emboldened by Vivian's poison. "Can she handle the scrutiny? Can she represent us?" Questions gnawed at his carefully built image, threatening to unravel it. Through it all, Rosetta and Stanley's connection deepened. In stolen moments, shared glances across crowded rooms, quiet exchanges in the back of limousines, they found sparks of something unspoken. Laughter that came too easily, silences that carried more weight than words. Yet beneath the attraction lay frustration. Rosetta bristled at being paraded like a trophy, her resentment simmering. Stanley battled his instinct to control, his fear of vulnerability clashing with his growing desire to protect her. At one charity dinner, when whispers about her unworthiness grew too loud, Rosetta finally snapped. "Why do you let them think this is real?" she hissed to Stanley as they moved through the crowd. "Why do you let me drown in their lies?" He stopped, turning to face her, his expression unreadable. "Because fighting them would destroy us both. This way, at least, we survive." His honesty cut through her anger, leaving her breathless. And in his eyes, she saw something raw, fear hidden beneath steel. Fear not of them, but of losing something he hadn't dared name. The night ended with her hand brushing against his, their fingers lingering longer than either admitted. Two worlds pressed in from opposite sides, Morel's relentless control, Vivian's insidious sabotage. The pressure built like storm clouds gathering, each moment drawing them closer, binding them not with choice, but with necessity. Yet within that pressure, something dangerous bloomed. Not obligation, not duty, but desire. And though both tried to deny it, they could feel it threading tighter with every glance, every whispered word, every stolen touch. The rising tension was no longer just about appearances. It was about the pull neither of them could fight. The city lights glittered across the glass walls of Stanley's headquarters, cold and magnificent, like jewels stolen from the night sky. Rosetta moved through the marble-floored lobby with careful steps, her gown brushing against her ankles. The evening gala had ended, but Morel insisted she accompany Stanley for post-event strategy. It sounded more like another test, another performance in the endless theater of appearances. Stanley had stepped away to speak with Terrell. Rosetta, left behind, drifted near the corridor lined with modern art. She wasn't supposed to linger, but curiosity tugged her closer when she heard her name slip from Terrell's mouth. "She's not what you think, Stanley," Terrell said, his tone edged with warning. "She may act different, but at the end of the day, she's like the others. Hungry for what you represent, not for who you are. Don't let your guard down." Rosetta froze, her pulse thundering. The words pierced through her chest, sharper than glass. "She's not a threat," Stanley replied, voice low. "She's unpredictable. But she doesn't play the game." "You think that makes her safe?" Terrell pressed. "It makes her more dangerous. The board is watching you. They won't tolerate distraction." Rosetta's throat tightened, her hand clenching against her gown. She wanted to step out, to defend herself, to shout that she wasn't playing any game, but the fear of confirming Terrell's suspicions rooted her in place. She slipped back into the shadows before either man could see her. Her chest ached with a mix of humiliation and betrayal. Stanley had defended her, yes, but the seed of doubt Terrell planted had been real enough to sting. To know that she was discussed like a liability, a threat to his empire, made her feel like little more than another pawn moved across a board she hadn't chosen to play on. When she returned home, Morel was waiting. The living room glowed with lamplight, casting her mother's sharp features into sculpted angles. Papers lay scattered across the coffee table. Financial reports, social ledgers, contracts that bound lives in invisible ink. "You're late," Morel said without looking up. "I spoke with members of Stanley's board this evening. They're receptive." Rosetta's brow furrowed. Receptive to what? Her mother's lips curved in a satisfied smile. "To my assurance that you will be the stability he needs. They've been pushing him for years to settle. Now, with the right influence, the right encouragement, they see you as the answer." Rosetta's stomach dropped. "You made a deal with his board?" "Not a deal," Morel corrected smoothly. "An understanding. They want him anchored. I want you secure. It's mutually beneficial." The room swayed around her. Her own mother had conspired to shove her deeper into a cage she was already suffocating in. She wasn't just a daughter anymore. She was currency, bartered between power and ambition. "Mama, how could you?" Her voice cracked, raw. Morel's gaze sharpened. "How could I not? Do you think independence pays the bills? Do you think your little sketches and daydreams will keep you afloat in this world? Love is a luxury, Rosetta. Security is survival. And I will not let you throw away your future." Tears burned at the corners of Rosetta's eyes, but she blinked them back, unwilling to let her mother see her break. "You don't want my future. You want your own reflected in me." Morel's silence was louder than denial. Rosetta fled to her room, her body trembling. She closed the door and pressed her forehead against it, fighting the sob clawing up her throat. She pulled her hidden sketchbook from beneath the bed and stared at the drawings of pendants and rings, of fragile dreams she'd never shown anyone. They looked childish now, crushed under the weight of the empire her mother wanted her chained to. She was nothing but a pawn. Terrell's suspicion, Stanley's defense, Morel's bargain all proved it. Every step she took had been orchestrated, every choice stripped away. Meanwhile, Vivian sharpened her knives in the shadows of the tabloids. She gave another interview, this time on live television, her voice dripping with elegance and scorn. "Stanley has always been complicated," Vivian said with a knowing smile. "He doesn't open his heart easily. I can't imagine him trusting so quickly, not with someone so new to his world, but I wish them well, of course." The implication was poison. Rosetta was naive, an outsider, a placeholder in a story Vivian insisted she had already written herself into. The headlines followed the next morning. Old Flame questions engagement. Is Rosetta just a passing phase? Stanley read the paper in silence, his jaw clenched. Terrell hovered nearby. Vivian knows what she's doing. She's trying to rattle you. It won't work, Stanley said. But when he closed the paper, Rosetta's face lingered in his mind. Her fire, her vulnerability, her fragility beneath the pressure of both her mother and his world. He told himself it didn't matter, that she was just part of a performance, a shield for appearances. But he remembered the tremor in her voice when she had whispered outside the restaurant, "I won't be made into something I'm not." And for the first time in years, he doubted his own walls. Rosetta, alone in her room, pressed her hand to her chest. The cracks inside her widened, letting in both fury and longing. She wanted to hate Stanley for allowing Terrell's doubt to take root, for being part of the system her mother manipulated. But when she closed her eyes, she remembered his voice at the gala. Belonging is not granted. It's earned. The contradiction tore at her. She couldn't tell if he was her captor or her only ally. One truth, however, burned clear. She was being used. By Morel, by the board, by the tabloids. Everyone had a stake in the story of Rosetta and Stanley, except Rosetta herself. And for the first time, the fragile defiance inside her threatened to ignite into something larger. Because if the world insisted she was a pawn, she would have to decide whether to play by their rules or break them entirely. The storm had been building, but when it broke fast. The headlines were crueler than before, their words like knives pressed into Rosetta's chest. Gold digger, heiress hooks billionaire Stanley Caldwell. She wants his fortune, not his heart. Vivian speaks out. Stanley deserves better. The images were worse. Paparazzi shots captured her at moments she hadn't known she was being watched. Her hand brushing his arm at a gala, her smile lingering too long at a dinner table, her figure stepping from his car late at night. To strangers, it was evidence. To Rosetta, it was a prison she couldn't escape. The whispers grew louder in her world, spilling into salons and soirees. Women she'd grown up around no longer smiled at her. They smirked. Men who once dismissed her now whispered behind raised glasses, their eyes darting between her and the stories in print. Even Morel's friends began circling, asking questions with honeyed voices laced with poison. Morel herself was livid. "You've ruined everything," she hissed, slamming the morning paper against the table. "Do you know what they're calling you? Do you understand what this does to our name?" Rosetta's hands shook as she folded the paper shut. "I didn't ask for this. I didn't choose any of it." "You chose to embarrass us," Morel snapped. "You chose to play the victim when you should have been proving them wrong." Rosetta's voice broke, sharper than she intended. "No, Mama. You chose this. You and your deals. You turned me into a pawn, and now I'm the one paying for it." The silence that followed was suffocating. Morel's face hardened into marble, her disappointment more cutting than anger. "Then you're weaker than I thought." That night, Rosetta packed a small bag and left. Not the city, there was nowhere to run from scandal, but Stanley. She couldn't face him, couldn't stand the thought of being another liability whispered about in his offices. She needed to reclaim something, anything, that was hers. Stanley felt the absence immediately. Her chair at his side was empty during a business dinner, her laughter absent in the silence of his penthouse. When Terrell brought him another stack of reports, laced with headlines and board concerns, Stanley dismissed him with a curt wave. "She's pulling away," Terrell observed carefully, pausing at the door. "She should," Stanley replied, his voice like stone. "She's better off." But the words tasted bitter, and when the door closed, he slammed his glass against the desk, the crack echoing through the room. In truth, he was suffocating. Rosetta's absence left him raw, the emptiness of his empire gaping wider with every passing day. The skyscrapers, the contracts, the endless zeros in his accounts. None of it mattered without the fire she had brought into his world. She had laughed in his face when others had flattered him, challenged him when others had cowered. And now, he feared Terrell had been right. That her defiance was nothing more than another performance, another tactic. Doubt gnawed at him, sharper than grief. What if she really was like the others? What if he had been fooled again? At the same time, Rosetta wandered the streets of the city, her hood drawn low against the drizzle. She ducked into cafes where no one knew her name, sketchbook in hand, trying to remember the girl she once was before tabloids and chandeliers and Stanley's steel gray eyes. But even there, whispers found her. Isn't that her? The Caldwell fiancé? Or whatever she is. They say she's only in it for the money. Her cheeks burned, her chest hollowing as though the words carved pieces from her ribs. She turned the page in her sketchbook, her hands trembling. The sketches blurred through tears. Pendants, rings, delicate designs that felt like foolish fantasies now. No one wanted her art. They wanted the scandal attached to her name. One evening, she returned to the apartment only to find Morel waiting, arms folded, eyes cold. You think running away from him will protect you? It won't. You've already been branded. Without him, you are nothing but a scandal. With him, at least you had power. Rosetta's throat ached, but she forced herself to meet her mother's gaze. I'd rather be nothing than live as your pawn. Her words hung in the air, heavier than any chandelier. For the first time, Morel's composure cracked, her lips tightening before she turned away. Rosetta's world shrank to silence. Nights were lonelier, days sharper. The city no longer shimmered with possibilities. It pressed down on her like stone. Meanwhile, Stanley buried himself in work, but the emptiness refused to be silenced. Meetings blurred into one another, deals inked with ruthless efficiency. Yet when he returned to his penthouse at night, the silence screamed. He poured whiskey after whiskey, staring out over the city that once represented everything. Now, it mocked him. Terrell found him one late night, the room lit only by the glow of the skyline. You're unraveling, Terrell said quietly. Stanley didn't turn. I built all of this with my hands, every inch of it, and it feels like ash. Terrell hesitated. You let her in. That's why. Stanley's hand tightened on his glass. And that was my mistake. But the bitterness in his tone couldn't hide the truth. It wasn't a mistake he regretted. It was a wound he didn't know how to heal. The tabloids pressed harder. Vivian smiled from glossy covers, her interviews more venomous each week. He'll come back to me, he always does. The board grew restless, whispers about Rosetta turning into questions about Stanley's judgment. Rosetta's credibility crumbled in her world. Invitations stopped arriving. Friends distanced themselves. Even Morel's circle grew cold, leaving Rosetta stranded between a mother who despised her weakness and a man she couldn't bear to face. The love story that had begun with sparks now lay buried beneath ashes of doubt, scandal, and despair. And in the quiet of their separate nights, both Stanley and Rosetta asked the same question, though they'd never admit it aloud. What if this is impossible? Because no matter how tightly they had once clung to each other, the world had found a way to pry them apart, and neither knew if love, fragile as it was, could ever survive the weight pressing down on them now. The days blurred into weeks, each one heavier than the last. Rosetta tried to convince herself she was free. Free from Morel's claws, free from the suffocating spotlight, free from Stanley's empire. But freedom felt strangely hollow. Her sketches lay untouched, her notebook closed. She wandered the city streets but found no peace in anonymity, not when whispers still followed her. Coffee shop conversations turned sharp the moment she walked in. Gold digger, fiancé for hire. The words cut deeper than she let anyone see. It would have been easier to walk away completely, to let the world swallow her into obscurity. Yet, at night, when silence pressed against her chest, she remembered the way Stanley had looked at her. Not as a pawn, not as a liability, but as though he saw the storm she carried inside and wanted to stand in it with her. And that scared her more than the tabloids. Across the city, Stanley sat in a boardroom filled with suits and sharp voices. Spreadsheets glowed on the screen, projections promising billions. The merger deal had been months in the making, a partnership that would cement his dominance across industries. Every board member urged him forward, every voice insisting this was the move that would define his legacy. But on the glossy pages of the investor packet, another headline stared back at him. Rosetta Sinclair, the billionaire's fatal distraction. The words blurred as his chest tightened. Terrell's warning echoed in his ears. She's a weakness, a liability. You can't let her in. For years, Stanley had believed it. For years, he had built walls high enough to keep betrayal out. Yet Rosetta had slipped through anyway, defiant and unyielding. And what had he done? He had doubted her, judged her, treated her as if she were just another shadow from his past. The memory of her storming out of the gala replayed in his mind, her voice trembling. I won't be made into something I'm not. He had failed her. Again. The board droned on, but Stanley's decision crystallized in silence. Without another word, he closed the packet, pushed back his chair, and stood. Cancel the merger, he said flatly. The room erupted. What? You can't— This is billions, one director sputtered. It's your legacy. Stanley's gaze swept the room, cold and unwavering. Legacies built on lies crumble. This deal isn't worth the cost. Terrell stared at him, disbelief flickering into something else. Respect, maybe even hope. Stanley turned his back on the board, his decision final. For the first time in years, he walked away from power, not toward it. Rosetta heard the news in a cafe, her cup of tea halfway to her lips when the broadcast broke. Breaking report: Caldwell Enterprises cancels multi-billion-dollar merger. Sources say the move is linked to personal reasons, with speculation mounting around his rumored fiancée. Her hand froze, the cup trembling. He had done it for her, not for the board, not for appearances. For her. She rushed outside, heart pounding against her ribs. The city lights blurred as she hailed a cab, the address spilling from her lips before she could think. His penthouse. Stanley stood at the window when she arrived, his reflection carved against the skyline, shoulders heavy with a weight only he could carry. Why? Her voice cracked as she stepped inside, the word escaping before she could contain it. Why would you throw everything away? He turned slowly, his eyes shadowed, his jaw tight. Because I've already lived through betrayal once. I let it turn me into a man who trusted no one, who judged before listening. And when you came along, I did it again. I doubted you. I let them paint you as a weakness. But Rosetta— His voice broke on her name, rough with emotion. I'd rather lose billions than lose you. Tears welled in her eyes, hot and stinging. You don't understand. I tried walking away because it was easier. Easier than fighting you, fighting my mother, fighting the world. But easy isn't what I want anymore. She stepped closer, her voice trembling with truth. I want difficult. I want messy. I want you. Not because of obligation. Not because of appearances. But because somewhere between the lies and the headlines, you became the one thing I can't walk away from. The silence between them throbbed with raw honesty, a silence filled not with doubt, but with recognition. Stanley's chest rose and fell, his walls crumbling for the first time in years. Say it again, he whispered. Rosetta's tears spilled as she reached for him, her hand finding his. I want you. The distance between them vanished. His arms closed around her, her body pressed against his, the city beyond them fading into irrelevance. His lips found hers. Not as a claim, not as a transaction, but as a vow. It was not obligation, not strategy. It was choice. And in that choice, they found something stronger than any contract or headline. Love born from defiance, tempered by fire, claimed by two souls who refused to surrender to the world's expectations. They pulled apart only enough to breathe, their foreheads touching, their hearts pounding in unison. Whatever comes next, Stanley murmured, we face it together. Rosetta nodded, her hand fisting in his shirt. Together. The empire could crumble, tabloids could burn, but in that moment, they knew. Love had already survived the fire. Would you risk your career or family's approval for true love? Comment your thoughts. The city buzzed with anticipation for the Caldwell Foundation's annual gala, a spectacle of wealth, power, and prestige. The chandeliers of the grand ballroom glittered like frozen stars, gowns shimmered across marble floors, and every camera lens in the city was fixed on the entrance. For weeks, whispers had circled that this night would be the one where Stanley Caldwell confirmed or denied his rumored engagement. Rosetta's stomach twisted as she stepped into the ballroom, Stanley's hand steady at her back. His presence was grounding, yet her heart thrummed with dread. Vivian was here. Rosetta felt it in the way the crowd's whispers sharpened, their eyes flicking toward her with cruel curiosity. Vivian appeared as though she had descended from the chandeliers themselves, draped in scarlet silk, her smile sharp enough to cut glass. She glided to the center of the ballroom, every camera swiveling to capture her, and in her hand, she held a sleek black folder. "Ladies and gentlemen," Vivian's voice rang out, amplified by the reporters she had invited. "We all admire Stanley Caldwell, a man of vision and power. But isn't it tragic that such brilliance is being clouded by deception?" Gasps rippled through the crowd. Vivian opened the folder, flashing photographs. Rosetta caught glimpses of her own face, distorted through cruel framing. Pictures of her leaving Stanley's penthouse. Images of her shopping with Morel, captioned with insinuations of greed. Even a manipulated photo suggesting she had once dined with a rival businessman. "She is not his salvation," Vivian declared, her eyes locking onto Rosetta with venom. "She is a fraud, a gold digger, a distraction. And tonight, the truth must be known." The cameras clicked wildly, the crowd buzzing with scandal. Rosetta's chest constricted as every eye turned on her, judgment heavy as stone. Morel's hand closed around her daughter's wrist, her nails biting into Rosetta's skin. "Stay silent," she hissed. "Bow your head. Let this pass. The deal can still be saved if you don't fight." Rosetta's throat burned, tears threatening to spill. All her life she had obeyed, bowed her head, swallowed her truth, played the role her mother demanded. But something inside her cracked wide open. She thought of Stanley canceling his billion-dollar deal, of him choosing her over power. She thought of her own sketches, her dreams buried under layers of obedience, and she realized she would rather be shattered by truth than caged by lies. "No," Rosetta whispered, her voice trembling at first, then strengthening. She stepped forward, shaking off her mother's grip. The cameras whirred louder, reporters shouting questions. Vivian's smile widened, certain she had won. Rosetta drew a deep breath, her heart hammering. "Vivian, you've spent weeks painting me as a fraud, but the truth is you're terrified. Terrified that someone might love Stanley without wanting his empire. Terrified that someone might stand beside him without bowing to him. That's why you smear me, because you couldn't keep him." Gasps filled the ballroom, Vivian's smile faltering. Rosetta turned toward the crowd, her voice clear, unwavering now. "Yes, I was pushed into this by expectations I never wanted. My mother, the tabloids, even the board, all tried to turn me into something I'm not. But I refused to live as anyone's pawn. Not hers, not yours, not even his." She glanced back at Stanley, her eyes shining. "If I choose him, it's not because of his money or power. It's because I see the man he is when the cameras are gone." The silence that followed was electric. Reporters froze mid-question, cameras trained tightly on her face. Vivian recovered quickly, her voice dripping with disdain. "Touching, but words won't erase evidence. The photos don't lie." "Neither do actions," another voice cut in, deep, commanding. Stanley stepped forward, his presence dominating the room. He reached for the folder in Vivian's hands, flipping through the so-called evidence with calm disdain. "These photos?" He held them high for all to see. "Manipulated, cropped, Fabricated. A desperate ploy from someone who lost her place in my life long ago. Vivian's face paled. You can't prove— I don't need to prove, Stanley interrupted, his voice carrying like thunder. Because tonight, I will make one thing clear to all of you. He turned to Rosetta, his gaze softening, the steel in his tone shifting to something raw. This woman is not a fraud. She is not a distraction. She is the only person who's had the courage to look past everything I own and still challenge me. She is the only one who's made me remember what it means to feel alive, and I will not let her stand alone against lies. He reached for Rosetta's hand, lifting it high before the flashing lights. Rosetta Sinclair is the woman I love, and whether the world approves or not, she is my choice. The ballroom erupted, shouts, applause, disbelief colliding in a frenzy. Morel's gasp cut through it, sharp and horrified. Rosetta, stop this madness. You'll ruin everything, our name, our future. But Rosetta turned to her mother, her spine straight, her voice unflinching. No, Mama. You ruined me the moment you decided my life was a bargaining chip, but tonight I take it back. I am not your pawn. I am not your deal. I am me. Morel's face blanched, her control crumbling under the weight of her daughter's defiance. Vivian's fury blazed, but her grip on the room had already shattered. Cameras swarmed around Stanley and Rosetta, capturing the moment not as scandal, but as declaration. The photos of Rosetta's tears, her defiance, and Stanley's vow would overwrite every lie Vivian had spun. As the chaos swelled, Stanley leaned close, his forehead brushing Rosetta's. You were brilliant, he whispered. Her tears finally fell, but they were no longer from fear. So were you. Together they walked out of the ballroom, fingers interlaced, their path illuminated by the storm of flashes. For once, Rosetta didn't bow her head. She lifted it high, her heart steady, her truth unshakable. Because tonight, they hadn't just survived scandal. They had destroyed it, and in its ashes, their love stood undeniable. 3 months. That's how long it had been since the night Rosetta stood in the ballroom, fire in her eyes, her voice steady as she tore apart the lies that had nearly destroyed us both. 3 months since I watched her defy Vivian's venom and Morel's control, not for my empire, not for appearances, but for herself. And in those months, everything had changed. Rosetta no longer lived under Morel's shadow. She rented a small studio downtown, its walls plastered with sketches, the air filled with the scent of melted wax, clay, and paint. Her jewelry designs, once hidden in secret notebooks, were now displayed in a gallery that bore her name. People whispered about her work, not as Stanley Caldwell's fiancée, but as Rosetta Sinclair, designer. Every time I walked into that gallery and saw strangers staring in awe at her pieces, pride surged in me stronger than any boardroom victory. And I had redefined what victory meant. For years, I believed success was measured in contracts signed, mergers closed, empires built. Now, I saw it differently. Success was the sound of her laughter echoing through my penthouse at midnight. Success was her hand slipping into mine when no cameras were watching. Success was learning that power meant nothing without partnership, without love. Tonight, she was in my apartment again, though it felt less like mine these days and more like ours. She sat on the sofa, barefoot, her hair spilling loose over her shoulders. A soft robe wrapped around her, streaked with flecks of silver and emerald paint. She was bent over her sketchbook, humming under her breath. I stood by the window, the city lights glowing beneath me, once my trophies, now only noise. The real masterpiece was across the room. She looked up, catching me watching her. You're brooding again, she teased. I smiled faintly. And you're painting again. You have more colors on you than on the canvas. She laughed, the sound warm and bright, and crossed to me. Her arms slid around my waist, her cheek pressing against my chest. Tell me what's in your head, she murmured. I kissed the crown of her hair, breathing her in. Jasmine, cedar, the scent that had unraveled everything I thought I knew about control. I used to stand here and think all of this, I gestured to the skyline, was everything. That each building with my name was proof I'd won. She tilted her head back, her eyes catching the glow of the city. And now? Now, I whispered, tightening my arms around her. None of it means anything without you. Her eyes softened, tears shimmering. She touched my jaw gently, her thumb brushing the scar I carried like an old brand of betrayal. Don't forget that. I won't, I promised. And I meant it. Later, I led her to the balcony. The night air was cool, brushing against our skin. She leaned against the railing, her hair lifting in the breeze. And in that moment, I saw every version of her. The frightened girl who had been used as a pawn, the fierce woman who had torn free, and the dreamer who had painted her own future. My hand slipped into my pocket, fingers closing around the velvet box I'd carried for weeks. It had burned there every night, waiting. Rosetta, I said, and she turned, brows lifting, her curiosity always alive in her gaze. I dropped to one knee. Her breath caught, her hands flying to her lips. I'm not asking you because of appearances, I said, my voice steady though my heart pounded. Not because the tabloids demand it. Not because of your mother, or the board, or this city. I'm asking you because every day without you feels like failure. And every day with you feels like the only success that matters. Marry me. Not for obligation, not for survival, but because we choose each other, again and again. Her tears fell, spilling down her cheeks, but she was laughing through them too. That defiant, beautiful laugh that had undone me from the beginning. She dropped to her knees in front of me, cupping my face with trembling hands. Yes, she whispered fiercely. Yes, 1,000 times. Yes. I slid the ring onto her finger. It gleamed in the city's glow, but nothing could outshine her smile in that moment. She kissed me then, with all the fire and tenderness I had once thought I'd lost forever. For the first time in years, I felt whole. When we pulled apart, our foreheads rested together, our breaths mingling in the night air. We'll build our own empire, I murmured. Not of glass and steel, but of choice, of love. She smiled through her tears, her voice steady. And this time, no one else writes the story. I held her tight, the city below us fading into nothing. This was my empire now. Not skyscrapers, not wealth, not headlines, but her. Always her. Do you believe arranged dates can turn into true love? Share your answer below. As the stars burned above us and her hand fit perfectly in mine, I knew the truth. This wasn't obligation. This wasn't survival. It was eternal love, forever, by choice.